So, hey GBA fans, it's Xilicks here, and welcome to week 6 of the weekly recap. Normally I would be joined with the Confusion, but he is taking a bit of personal time as he's having some IRL issues. So we do have a guest that was very kind to fill in, so please introduce yourself.
What's going on, GBA universe? This is Uzigunner here, talking very softly because it's 7 a.m. here in my country, and I'm going to be filling in for your boy Confusion just for this week. So sorry if I do end up being a bit awkward at times, but I'll do my best to be a proper replacement. So yeah,
so give him some love in the comments, and give Confusion some love as well. He is totally fine, but he is going through some stuff, so you know, all the kind words help. But anyways, let's get into our very first match. We have the Milwaukee Bewares versus the San Jose Sharpedos, and this battle is a little bit of a long one, so I've done my best to try to summarize it as well as I can. So the Bewares brought the roster of the Reuniclus, Tangrowth, Bronzong, Conkeldurr, Entei, and Forgus, while the San Jose Sharpedos have the roster of the Landers T, Rotomwash, Scizor, Roserade, Swallow, and Diancie. So starting this battle, we see the Bronzong against the Landers T. Tom is going to knock off right away. However, Wolfie is carrying the Cobra Berry, which will allow him to take that a lot better, and he can fire back with a Hidden Power Ice, doing a large chunk of damage versus the Landers right away. Now, Wolfie spoke about in his commentary in this battle, he didn't really want to spend most of his plays on over-predicting because he feels that hurt him in the past, so he did go for the HP Ice right there. I believe he mentioned that normally he would have gone for an over-prediction, thinking that the Landers would switch out, but it did work out for him as he was going to get that big HP Ice off. Then, not wanting to take another HP Ice, Tom is going to swap out for his Rotom Wash, which gives Wolfie the opportunity to set up his Stealth Rocks, and with rocks on the field, the Rotom is going to want to defog them away. So this is going to allow Wolfie to bring in his Reuniclus and set up the Trick Room to try to get some offensive pressure. However, Tom is going to reveal that he has the Protect, and he's going to use his Protect to try to stall out some of those Trick Room turns. Now, Wolfie does have a backup plan though, so he's going to take advantage of a turn where he predicts Tom will go for a Protect. He brings in his Tangrowth and sets up a Sunny Day, which is a bit dangerous to bring Sunny Day to a team that has a Mega Houndoom on it, but the Mega Houndoom wasn't brought, and he had ways of dealing with the Houndoom anyways, even if it was brought. So Wolfie's going to make the safe play of just going for the Giga Drain on the Rotom, but the Rotom is going to switch for the Roserade, which will be able to take that hit nicely. And then, depending on EV spreads here, the Tangrowth does have a chance to knock out with a Hidden Power Fire, but not wanting to risk the roll, he decides to switch out for his Entei, which is going to take a Sludge Bomb from the Roserade, and he will get the Poison. This particular Poison will wear down the Entei quite a bit throughout the battle, but then Tom, not wanting to take a Sacred Fire with his Roserade, is going to swap out for the Diancie, which is going to get burned by the first Sacred Fire and then flinched by an Iron Head. Luckily for Tom, though, he was carrying the Babiri Berry, which will allow the Diancie to survive long enough, and the flinch won't matter a whole lot because he is going to get up his Stealth Rocks on the following turn, as Wolfie's going to bring out his Reuniclus and try to get up the Trick Room again for more offensive pressure, but Tom does also have the Protect on his Diancie, which he will use to stall out the Trick Room turns a little bit more. Then we see the Scizor come out. Wolfie has a pretty good defensive check to that Scizor being the Conkeldurr, but Tom is going to continue the momentum, U-turning out to his Swallow, and then U-turning again on the incoming Entei to the Landorus. Then he will U-turn once again, which will put the Entei low enough to where the Poison will take it down. Then we are going to see Wolfie bring in his Conkeldurr and set up a Bulk Up. He gets to the +1, and he will be able to Mach Punch the incoming Rotom. Tom then brings in his Swallow, and Wolfie knows that nothing on his team can safely switch into the Swallow, so he just decides that he's going to stay in and go for the Mach Punch for damage. However, he does get a very big critical hit. This will take down the Swallow. Now, this crit was huge because without Swallow, Tom is going to lose a lot of offense that he previously would have had with the Swallow, because as I mentioned, nothing on Wolfie's team could take 2 hits, and nothing could safely switch into that Swallow, so losing it was very big. This will allow for Wolfie to set up more with his Conkeldurr. Tom, however, is going to recognize the threat of the Conkeldurr and put it to sleep with the Roserade. And speaking of sleep, we're going to see quite a bit of sleep in the following turns because the Bronzong is carrying the Hypnosis, which will put that Scizor to sleep. And then it's just a bunch of sleeping back and forth, kind of skipping over these turns because it gets a little bit repetitive. But eventually we are going to see the Tangrowth get in, set up a Sunny Day, which will allow it to knock out both the Roserade and the Scizor. The Tangrowth will go down to the Life Orb recoil, but this leaves Tom with only his Landorus at this point, which is not able to 1v1 the Forgus, giving Wolfie the 4-0 victory.
So, yeah, in the end, I would say that Swellow definitely would have been able to do much more, but of course, thanks to the Mach Punch crit, like Conkeldurr eventually is going to end up being one of the main wild cards that prevent Tom from being able to do what he wanted to do. And yeah, like it pretty much put the nail in the coffin, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So it definitely was a rather haxy kind of match, and still I would say that Wolfie did pretty well, because you know, turn 1 he made a no drawback play by going for an HP Ice, as Tom just went for a knockoff with his Lando T, and that pretty much gave him the free opportunity to set up rocks the very next turn, because now with this with no item being present anymore, he would lose absolutely nothing from setting up rocks, as knockoff is going to do much less damage than before, which really helped Wolfie somewhat, I guess you could say. But yeah, like in the end, it's tough to say how the exact match would have went if RNG did not play a factor. It definitely was skewed especially in the end phase when Swellow went down. Alright, so next up we got the Kansas City Jirachis versus the Detroit Steelwings, with Jolt bringing Breloom, Celesteela, Alolan Persian, Seismitoad, Arcanine, as well as Mega Venusaur, with Crimson on the other hand bringing Lycanroc, Thundurus Incarnate, Suicune, Infernape, Jirachi, and Cofagrigus. So as far as how the match went, turn 1, Crimson leads off with his Lycanroc, as Jolt leads off with his Scarf Breloom. And for some very unquestionable reason, Crimson decides to stay in, as Jolt's Breloom is going to be able to outspeed it and knock this thing out with 2 Bullet Seeds, which was a bit of a huge oversight on Crimson's behalf. Chase then goes into his Cofag and tries to set up Calm Minds with it, as Jolt goes into his Perfect Check, Snarl Alolan Persian, which is able to negate its special attack boost with a good chunk of damage with Snarl, of course, as Cofag does end up going for an HP fighting, doing 52% to it. Chase hard swaps into Ape, as Jolt makes the safe play going for another Snarl before being forced out into his Rocky Helmet defensive Arcanine, which chews the close combat just fine and damages the Infernape. Crimson then goes hard into Suicune, as Jolt makes the optimal play, brushing off the close combat damage with Morning Sun. Jolt then goes hard into his Seismitoad, expecting a Scald of some sorts, as Crimson goes into Scofag, which does not phase Jolt, as he does go for a Toxic on the very next turn, putting it on a timer before going for Rocks the next turn, as Cofag pulls off some nice tech in Rest and waking up with Chesto Berry, making things rather harder for Jolt in the grand scheme of things. Despite that, Jolt still goes for Toxic the very next turn, as the Cofag once again goes for a Calm Mind. After that, Jolt makes a rather small hiccup by hard swapping into his Venu instead of his Alolan Persian, taking nearly half from the Shadow Ball before going into his Alolan Persian and barely living in a sliver amount of HP, as Chase once again goes for a rest with his Cofag, giving Jolt a rather tough time. Finally, the Alolan Persian parting shots itself out, and in comes the Venusaur, which ends up going for a Roar instead of Synthesis, as Jolt ended up forgetting that Cofag was no longer at +2 and was worrying about being KO'd by the Shadow Ball. The Infernape ends up getting phased in, and due to the misplay Jolt made in the earlier turn, he's forced to go for a Synthesis, as Infernape ends up going for a Swords Dance, predicting just that, putting Jolt in a rather precarious position. As a result, he's forced to hard switch in and sack off his Seismitoad, where +2 Flare Blitz into close combat is going to be more than enough to knock it out. Despite that, Jolt is going to be able to quickly recover by going into Scarf Mach Punching Breloom, which is going to pick off the Infernape. Once again, out comes the Cofag as it goes for a Shadow Ball, which the Spadef Mega Venu is going to be able to take just fine, as Jolt once again roars it out into the Jirachi. This was followed up with Rachi going for a Shadow Ball, trying to catch the Persian, but Jolt just goes into Arcanine, which took the hit just fine. From there, nothing special really happened other than Crimson going to Kofag, taking the blitz before resting again, before going into his Suicune to take the next flare blitz, which would lead to Jolt going into his Celesteela, taking the Skull and not get burnt. From there, the Coon goes for Combine, and as Joel just sets up an Autotomize with the Celesteela, scaring the Suicune out, not wanting to take a potential Gracium Z move, and goes straight out into Scophagrigus, as Joel's Celesteela just goes for a Giga Drain before chipping it down to 7% with Air Slash. After that, Chase chooses to keep it alive and goes into his Thundurus, as Celesteela is gonna go set up another Autotomize before going for a Bulk Up, as Jolt is gonna be able to snag a crit on it with Air Slash, which would lead to a double down as Thundurus KOs it with Wild Charge. From there, Crimson goes into his Rachi as Jolt goes into his Persian, where the Rachi ends up surprising Jolt as it ends up being Scarf, thereby outspeeding it and knocking it out with U-turn, before pointlessly going into Kofag and letting it die instead of keeping it as a sack fodder. What followed after would be Breloom going in against the Suicune, forcing Crimson to hard swap into his Jirachi, taking the Bullet Seed just fine before KOing the Mega Venusaur on the switch-in with Psychic, giving Arcanine the free switch-in, taking the next Psychic just fine before getting HP back with Morning Sun, and then hitting the incoming Suicune with Flare Blitz before going for a Toxic, as his Coon is not going to be able to take out the K9, and due to it going for Morning Suns repeatedly, it's forced to go for a rest, giving Arcanine the initiative to go back to a comfortable amount of health before finally going into Breloom and going for a game with Bullet Seed, which unfortunately is not going to be able to get the job done due to 2 hits, but thanks to Rocky Helmet chip damage from the Arcanine as Rachi went for a U-turn the following turn, putting the nail in the coffin, as the next Scald from Suicune is not going to be able to burn the Breloom as it switches in. It's going to go for a Bullet Seed and hit 3 times, which is going to be able to knock that thing out, leaving Jirachi for last, which Arcanine is going to be able to easily take out. So, as far as how that match goes, I think Joel definitely out-prepped Crimson by a good margin, and Crimson definitely did play the match to the best of his abilities, especially with his Scophagrigus, but I really found the idea of him just letting it take all that damage and then just switching this thing in on and letting it die instead of keeping it as a sack fodder was really questionable on his behalf. What are your thoughts, man?
So one thing that we've seen from Jolt a lot this season is just, even if a match doesn't seem like it's going too well for him in the middle, or maybe it is going really well for him in the middle, he always has some way to seal the deal with the end. And I mean, this game, like others, he's been using that Breloom very offensively, scoring 3 kills this week. And you know, the Scarf set was just a really good bring. It allowed him to outspeed some things that normally he wouldn't be able to outspeed, and also like even just running Mach Punch despite having the Choice Scarf, you know, it helps for like he was able to pick off the Infernape with it, and really just, I don't know, it's interesting to see his sets each week because they're always
unique,
not necessarily like super creative, but they work.
Yeah.
And that's always great to see from the coaches. Whenever they bring a set, it does well, it does exactly what they want it to do. And that's what we saw this match, and that's what we've seen in his previous matches, and he definitely deserves to be in a spot where he's at right now, being undefeated.
For sure, man. For sure.
So moving on to the next matchup, I have the Tampa Bay Luxrays versus the Philadelphia Scizors. The Luxrays have the roster of Slowking, Snorlax, Registeel, Keldeo, Weavile, and Mega Charizard X, while the Scizors brought the Slurpuff, Tapu Bulu, Nihilego, Greninja, Uxie, and Victini. Right away, we see the Greninja set up a layer of spikes as Chimpact recognizes that Mono doesn't have any hazard removal other than potentially a defog on the Charizard. And then the Slowking fires off a Z all-out pummeling. The Greninja is, however, carrying the Chople Berry, which will allow it to barely survive and U-turn to the Uxie as Slowking sets up the Trick Room. Knowing that he's able to get the Stealth Rock damage on the Charizard at the very least once, Chimpact is going to get his Stealth Rocks up while Mono swaps to the Registeel. The Registeel will get the rocks up of its own and get Thunder Waved by the Uxie. The Thunder Wave will kind of set the tone for the match, as we are going to see quite a lot of Thunder Waving happening. The Registeel will attempt to Thunder Wave the Uxie back, but he will miss as Chimpact U-turns to his Tapu Bulu. And he wants to trap the Registeel with his Mean Look set and potentially set up to have either put in a lot of damage with the Tapu Bulu or potentially even like win the game, depending on how much he's able to set up. But we do see the Charizard switch in to the Meanlook, and it's able to get up a Roost, so the Stealth Rock damage didn't really matter that much. The Nihilego is going to come out on the turn that it Roosts, which does force the Registeel back in, and the Registeel is going to lose its leftovers from a knockoff. Chimp then is just going to sack his Greninja, giving him the switch to the Victini, which goes for the Searing Shot on the incoming Slowking, then swapping to Uxie, which will result in the Slowking going down, but it gives Mono the chance to revenge kill with the Charizard. Chimpact then has the chance to revenge kill with his Nihilego, and now we have a very good bring by Mono, being the Swords Dance Keldeo, which will set up the Swords Dance, kill the Nihilego, and then also kill the Tapu Bulu, despite having the Kebia Berry because it is carrying the Poison Jab. Chimpact does, however, realize that his Victini is able to survive an Aqua Jet with a Pasho Berry, so he's going to go into his Victini and paralyze the Keldeo, which will give Slurpuff a chance to potentially win the game. Since the Keldeo is paralyzed, the Slurpuff will be able to outspeed, and it begins to set up a mix of Cotton Guard and Calm Minds. The Registeel will come in and miss 2 Thunder Waves, but he will hit the third. Chimpact doesn't really mind getting paralyzed though, as he is carrying the rest with the Chesto Berry. So if he's able to rest, it will clear off the paralysis and he will get the Unburden boost, which will allow him to outspeed the rest of Mono's team and potentially win the game with the Calm Mind, Cotton Guard, Dazzling Gleam, Slurpuff. Never thought I would say that sentence ever in my life, but the Slurpuff is going to get fully paralyzed to the point where he's not able to rest, and the Registeel is able to kill the Slurpuff, giving Mono the victory. A bit of a sad way to see Chimp get his first loss this season, but both teams had a lot of paralysis action going, and it was bound to happen in one way or another.
Yeah, definitely. Like, what I really liked about this match in general, other than Chimpact wearing a Punjabi and Pajama, would have to be the fact that Chimpact had fully knew going into this match how difficult the matchup was, and to counteract it, he realized that he would need to be as innovative as he possibly could be when prepping for him, which he definitely showed. Like, he brought freaking Nihilego of all things, and well, as you mentioned, the Slurpuff set is pretty self-explanatory. So yeah, in that sense, I would say that it kind of was rather unfortunate to see how it all ended. Then again, like, just as much fault also does end up going to Chimpact, because he didn't realize it until the very end that if he got paralyzed and his opponent went for Iron Head the next turn, he just outright lost the game. So it was a bit of an oversight on Chimpact's behalf, as well as, letting his Tapu Bulu die. So, like, there definitely were some errors that he made, but at the same time, for a guy who was severely behind, mainly on the basis of matchup alone, he did definitely perform quite well, and for that, he definitely does have my applause. Alright, so next up we got the San Francisco Giants and the Bronx Beartics, with Geo bringing Blacephalon, Mega Scizor, Shaman, Ditto, Haxorus, as well as Mew, with Joey on the other hand bringing Zygarde 50%, Magnezone, Salazzle, Whimsicott, Rhydon, and Lickilicky. Alright, so turn 1, Jolt leads with his Scarf Whimsicott as Geo leads with Mew, as Joey immediately U-turns out into Lickilicky, taking the Flamethrower just fine, which would follow up with him going for a Wish, as Mew sets up Rocks the following turn, adding a bit of pressure to Joey's side. The Mew then reveals the Thunder Wave the following turn, which, with Licky not being able to Dragon Tail it out, as it does end up getting fully paralyzed. Geo then finally hard swaps into Ditto, finding out the Lickilicky's full set, as Joey goes for a Wish, and as he does have absolutely nothing to lose. Joey then hard swaps into Rhydon as Geo Fire punches with Licky, giving Joey the free chance to set up Rocks as well, which would lead to Geo going hard into his Shaman as Joey sets the bands up, forcing him to hard swap into his Whimsicott just to take the incoming psychic damage. Joey once again goes for a U-turn as Geo hard swaps into his Ditto, that's now a Whimsicott, taking that damage and giving Joey the initiative to hard swap into his Magnezone, giving him a very free Flash Cannon. Critting the Shaman, and putting it below half and getting a SPDEF drop too in the process. Choosing the more offensive play, Joey chooses to go for another flash cannon as Gio hard swaps into his Ditto. That's now a Magna Zone, eating the flash cannon just fine. Now this ends up being a rather turning point in the battle as well as Joey's biggest misplay, as despite the fact that his Magna Zone was Shed Shell and could easily swap out, he chooses to stay in and risk Gio's Ditto being HP ground, which it does end up being, making him lose his Magna Zone in the process. Followed up with Joey going into a Salazzle after, forgetting that Ditto scarfed and that if it's HP ground, it just outright Okos it, which as a result leads to the Salazzle taking the Stealth Rocks damage for absolutely no reason. From there, Joey goes into his Zygarde, taking the next HP ground just fine before taking this as the chance to get a free sub up as Gio goes hard into his Shaman, giving Joey a free Toxicroak. Now predicting him to go for a Synthesis, Joey is actually gonna trap it with Thousand Waves, and which enables it to beat it 1v1 with Sub Protect, while having the needed SPDEF to chew the HPIs just fine, and while end up being in a low amount of HP in the process, still be behind the sub. Gio then goes into his Mega Scizor, which never really ends up Mega Evolving due to some silly errors on Gio's part, allowing Joey to get 2,000 arrows off as the Scizor ends up picking it off with U-turn, but being put in such a range where the next Rocks damage is going to be able to knock it out. Gio then goes into his Haxorus, which gives Joey a free invite into Scarf Whimsicott, forcing the Haxorus out and having the Scizor die to Rocks. After that, out comes the Blacephalon, taking the Rocks damage, which follows up with Joey having his Rhydon take the incoming Flamethrower quite well, before following it up with an Earthquake, doing a good chunk of damage to Mew, picking it off in the very next turn with it as Gio just chooses to get a Toxicroak on it. Finally, Gio goes out into his Haxorus in a last ditch effort to sweep, but not before taking an Earthquake to the face, before taking out the Rhydon with a devastating Drake, only to get picked off by a Scarf Whimsicott. Ditto comes in again in an attempt to win the speed tie, but regrettably loses it. Finally, out comes the Blacephalon, which is gonna be able to take the Moonblast just fine and be able to KO it with Flamethrower, getting the Beast Boost off, which now puts Joey in trouble, as due to letting his Salazzle take the pointless Rocks damage, he's now potentially in range of another Flamethrower after Rocks, along with his Lickilicky getting two-shotted and potentially losing due to Paralysis, which unfortunately ends up being the case. So yeah, I guess you can say that this week has been a very, very huge case of yellow magic. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, seeing 2 games end with paralysis, it does kind of suck. Obviously, you know, hacks is part of the game, but it's unfortunate in a competitive environment whenever it happens. Obviously, the coaches aren't like, you know, intentionally making it happen, so no shade should be thrown towards anyone's way. One thing I did like seeing in this match was the Ditto with the correct hidden power. I believe it was season 6, maybe season 7, where Gio had the Ditto against, I believe it was Battler X. I believe it was his Heatran, and the Heatran was carrying the hidden power ground while the opposing Ditto did not have the correct hidden power, so Heatran was able to knock it out. But here we saw the reverse where Gio, you know, maybe learned from his lesson, was carrying the right hidden power, so
Yep.
that's always something cool to see.
For sure.
But yeah, other than that, not much else to say about the battle. I think you covered it pretty well. So I'm just going to move on to the next one, where I have the San Diego Chim Chargers versus the Melbourne Rotoms. The Chim Chargers brought a roster of Slowbro, Amoonguss, Empoleon, Kyurem, Tapu Koko, and Alolan and Raichu, while the Rotoms have the Pelipper, Kingdra, Mega Swampert, Mimikyu, Kartana, and Ludicolo. Leading this match, we see Aaron setting the rain as he usually does with his Pelipper, and MV setting the terrain with his Tapu Koko. MV is going to U-turn right away, knowing the Pelipper probably won't want to stay in, and MV is going to bring in his Kyurem on the Ludicolo. Both Mons trade in Ice Beam. Kyurem not taking too much damage, however, is able to deal quite a lot of damage to the Ludicolo and also freeze it. The freeze won't really matter though, as the Ludicolo is carrying the Scald and will go for it to both break the freeze and attack the Kyurem, but the Ludicolo will not survive another Ice Beam from the Kyurem. This will give the Swampert a chance to come in and Mega Evolve and get a big Earthquake off against the Slowbro, and then assuming the Slowbro will recover, which it does, Cybertron is able to get to +1 with a Power-Up Punch, and then is able to 2-hit KO the Slowbro with Earthquake after barely surviving a Grass Knot. Now, because of this huge Grass Knot damage, the Swampert won't be able to reliably switch into anything later on in the match, which is going to be very good for Envy. Envy is then going to bring out his Tapu Koko to apply pressure, but then he swaps to his Kyurem as Cybertron brings in his Kartana. Envy is then going to double to his Amoonguss and then triple to the Empoleon, expecting the Pelipper. And while the Pelipper is out on the electric terrain, the Empoleon is able to go for a Hidden Power Electric and knock out that Pelipper. The Swampert is then going to come out to revenge kill, and Envy decides to sack off his Kyurem, then sends in his Amoonguss, which will force the Swampert to Ice Punch and take itself out to the Rocky Helmet recoil. It either would have been that, or he would have gone down to the Giga Drain from the Amoonguss. Either way, that Swampert did not stand a chance. Aaron will then send out the Kingdra and try to make use of the last few turns of Rain now that the Pelipper is gone, while Envy has his Empoleon, which is really a great switch into that Kingdra because it is able to take quite a couple hidden powers from its super effective ones at that. The Empoleon will eventually go down though, but it was able to bring the Kingdra in range of Tapu Koko's Dazzling Gleam. The Tapu Koko then will also be able to U-turn on the Mimikyu, which comes in to break its disguise, and even with a Swords Dance on the Mimikyu, the Amoonguss will survive a hit from it and knock it out with a Foul Play, and then will also be able to take down the Kartana with a Hidden Power Fire, giving Envy the 3-0 victory.
As far as my thoughts on that match goes, to be honest, I would say that Envy, first and foremost, Envy prepped very adequately, which definitely gave him an edge here. But the biggest mistake that Cybertron made here, I guess you could say, would have to be getting very, very impatient with his Mega Swampert early on in the game, because at the beginning phase, he had Envy had a healthy Slowbro as well as a healthy Amoonguss, which kind of guaranteed the fact that no matter what it is that Cybertron tried to do, trying to set up early with a power up punching Mega Swampert isn't necessarily going to be what wins him the game. And as far as how the matchup went, I definitely believed that if chipped down adequately enough, the Mega Swampert had all the potential in the world to be able to clean up late game. But instead, what Cybertron did was just pretty much hit what was in front of him, and while yes, you could make the argument that he was able to get some sort of kills from it, in the grand scheme of things, I genuinely don't think that it helped him much, but rather ended up being more of a hindrance to him in the process, as, you know, the Amoonguss is going to be able to take the next Ice Punch just fine, and thanks to the Rocky Helmet damage, the Mega Swampert is just going to die a pointless death, I believe. So in that sense, I guess the takeaway from it would have to be the fact that Aaron is still somewhat finding it difficult to adapt to the singles format, and especially draft format. So stuff like this, I guess, is to be expected, and I definitely do wish him all the best. But yeah, I just hope that he takes all these past losses into consideration before prepping for his future matches, because the way things are going, it's obviously not looking good for him at all. Alright, so next up we got the New Orleans Pelipers and the Montreal Hapsalts. Sorry for butchering the pronunciation almost. With John having Piloswine, Tornadus Terrain, Mega Diancie, Tentacruel, Jolteon, and Cresselia, with Aster bringing the Mega Lopunny, Zoroark, Fortress, Milotic, Zapdos, and Sylveon. Now, the game starts off with John leading off with his Jolteon, while Aster leads off with the Sylveon. Turn 1, John goes for a Protect to guarantee the Flame Orb going off, which would result to the immediate Quick Feet, while Aster just goes for a Wish turn 1, making sure that whatever potential damage John does the very next turn immediately gets negated. He then Volt Switches out into his Tentacruel, taking absolutely nothing from the Hyper Voice, while Sylveon goes back to full health, thanks to the Wish. John then makes a fine read, predicting the Zapdos to want to come out and doubles into his Piloswine, as Aster does indeed hard swap into Zapdos, catching him red-handed. From there, Piloswine sets up rocks as Aster hard swaps into his Fortress. Pokemon then immediately decides to switch into his Rocky Helmet Tornadus, as Aster immediately spins the rocks away, which, while good for him, still puts him in a tough spot, as now with Tornadus terrain in, it essentially guarantees John dictating the pace of the match. However, for this specific situation, the static tech Zapdos is gonna come through for Aster, as he switches in directly to that, as Tornadus goes for a U-turn, getting that crucial paralysis off, which is definitely going to be able to neuter the Torn's effectiveness by a decent margin. Despite that, John still gets a free switch into his Mega Diancie, which now gives him the chance to get the free Mega Evolution off, as well as set up a Calm Mind in the very next turn, putting Aster in a rather precarious position, as his designated check, which would be his Flame Orb Milotic, will not be able to be much of a lenient answer, as in the very next turn, the +1 Moonblast is going to be able to do over half to it, making it a guaranteed 2-shot, which would be phenomenal for John. But the Scald from Milotic on that exact turn is going to be able to snag a burn on it, thereby severely denting its longevity and putting the Diamond Princess's health below half. Aster then lets the Milotic die to the next incoming Moonblast, giving him the free switch into Lopunny. John then goes into his designated Mega Lopunny check, which would be his Rocky Helmet Tornadus terrain, as Aster gets the Mega Evolution off and goes for a Drain Punch, thereby hurting himself in the process. John once again makes a basic read, predicting the Mega Lopunny to switch out and going for a U-turn once again, thereby giving him the initiative to go out in his Mega Diancie again, giving him a free turn to go for a Power Gem, as Aster goes hard into Sylveon to take the hit. From there, John chooses to keep Mega Diancie alive and hard swaps into his Tentacruel, as Aster's Sylveon just goes for a Calm Mind, which turns out to be very good for John, in the sense that he now knows that his Tentacruel should be able to quite leniently handle the Sylveon, assuming the Sylveon does have Protect, which he did end up revealing in the very first turn, as he does reveal the Poison Jab the very next turn and gets a solid chunk of damage on the Sylveon, putting it below half, as the +1 Hyper Voice does not do much, if anything at all, especially considering the fact that the Tentacruel did not have much, if any, SPDEF investment whatsoever, as well as HP investment, which ends up putting the Sylveon below half. From there, John decides to go for a Swords Dance, as Aster ends up making a rather very questionable play, going for a Protect, which, while understandable as it is going to be able to give this thing some leftovers recovery, is still quite dreadful in the sense that he's now staring at a +2 Tentacruel in the face. Because of that turn, his Fortress is going to be in the receiving end of 2 +2 Waterfalls, as Aster ends up going immediately to that after the Swords Dance, putting it below half, which would lead to Aster going for Volt Switch in an attempt to be the one to get the initiative instead. He ends up swapping into his Mega Lopunny, which then goes for a return, as John once again hard swaps into his Torn to get more Rocky Helmet chip damage before letting it die the very next turn, prioritizing damage on Megalop over its longevity, and at the same time finding out whether the Mega Lopunny was adamant or not. After that, out comes the Burn Jolteon, which now outspeeds it courtesy of Quick Feet, thereby forcing out Aster and sacking off his Sylveon, which could not take 2 Thunderbolts even after going for Protect the very next turn. Aster then goes into his Fat Zapdos, which gives John the green light towards going for a Volt Switch, going back into his Piloswine, as Aster sets up the substitute. Now, due to Zapdos being in a low amount of HP, Aster chooses to prioritize health over Toxic in the Piloswine, going for a Roost on that turn as Pilo breaks the sub with Ice Shard. John then chooses to set up rocks early, as the Zapdos ends up toxicking it on that exact turn, putting it on a timer. After that, Aster hard swaps into his Fortress, as John ends up going for an Icicle Crash, which thanks to the 2 Waterfalls from Tentacruel, as well as the Stealth Rock damage, is unfortunately going to put this thing in the range of the next Earthquake, which just goes to show how going for Protect on that Tentacruel instead of hard swapping into his Fortress ends up costing him big time, as now not only does he lose his Fortress, the rocks are now here to stay, putting Aster in a rather really tough position. Either way, Aster then goes out in his Mega Lopunny after letting his Fortress die, for which John has another solid response to in his Cresselia, as it takes figuratively nothing from the Drain Punch, before going for a nice and free Toxic on Aster's Hard Swap into Zapdos, which followed up with the Rocks damage and the fact that Zapdos is not even pressured to begin with, ensures that there's absolutely no way for his Zapdos to 1v1 the Cress. John then hard swaps into Pylo, hoping to put Aster in a position where he continuously roosts up with the Zapdos as he goes for an Earthquake, which does not end up happening as Aster does hard switch in that exact turn into his now disguiseless Zoroark. Unfortunately, in the situation, Aster can't do much other than U-turning with it and switching into Zapdos, having it take more Rocks damage as thankfully John chooses to just go for an Earthquake. From there, it all goes downhill as John's Piloswine is gonna Earthquake the Zapdos as it goes for a Roost and is able to snag a crit in the process, making sure that it immediately OHKOs. After that, in a very last ditch effort, Aster goes into his Mega Lopunny and goes for a Power Up Punch in order to have an even remote chance to be able to pull this back, as John makes the rather somewhat questionable play by going into his Mega Diancie, giving it a free +1 boost, knocking it out in the process. John then chooses to go hard into his Cresselia, being able to eat the +1 return just fine before going for a sub in the process, not wanting to be put in a 50-50 against the Zoroark, which ends up somewhat costing him big time, as now Aster's able to encore it into a substitute, which ends up forcing John to sack off his Piloswine, as Aster just takes it out with a Drain Punch. After that, out comes the Jolteon as it does end up going for a Volt Switch, as Aster does end up picking off the Tentacruel with 2 Drain Punches, but regrettably that's not going to be enough to take the next Thunderbolt from the Jolteon, which regrettably takes away all of Aster's chances. But then again, he did still have the Zoroark with him, which if it did possess the Sucker Punch could actually have a chance to win him the game, but unfortunately that did not end up being the case. John is going to be able to pick that thing off with a Volt Switch and win the game with a 2-0. So as far as what I think on that match goes, I think John definitely dictated how the match went for the majority of it. It's just that when he misplayed big time with his Cresselia, that he was put in a rather very tough position, because if the Zoroark actually did have Sucker Punch and was able to knock out the Jolteon, which John admitted was a very huge chance, I don't think that John would have been able to come back from it. So in that sense, John definitely played the early and mid game perfectly, but rather almost threw the entire game away in the end game phase. Don't you think?
Yeah, I honestly think that this battle is sort of another instance where Aster is kind of losing to his own team building. And I mean that in the way of, while the Lopunny set was very good, you know, he was missing a potential Sucker Punch on Zoroark. And obviously it's easy to sit here after the fact and say, well, the Sucker Punch would have been a good bring. He was clearly thinking something differently before the match. But even just like during the match itself, he was kind of playing passively, which had he been breaking walls earlier on, the Lopunny would have had a better shot, or even the Zoroark would have had a better shot late game. We didn't really see that though, but I think Aster was playing well, and you know, he did get himself in a position to potentially win with that Lopunny, but obviously it didn't work out for him, and John was able to pick up the win. We did see some classic John stuff with Jolteon putting in a lot of work, and then obviously the Piloswine, which seems to be one of his favorite mons, and he does very well with it, so I'm not going to question, even though I can't seem to figure out how to work that thing out for myself. But yeah, I don't know, just like some pretty good plays by John early on. As you mentioned, you know, he did almost choke the game away, but it didn't end up happening, and he picked up the 2-0 win.
Moving into our next matchup, this is recorded separately, so my apologies that it's kind of going to be jumping around or whatever, but this is going to be the Florida Gators versus the Victorian Shadows. The Gators have the roster of Flygon, Heatran, Mega Altaria, Klefki, Buzzwole, and Drapion, while the Victorian Shadows brought their Rotom Heat, Hawlucha, Mega Alakazam, Araquanid, Togekiss, and Metagross. Starting off the battle, we see the Flygon versus the Rotom Heat. Gator is afraid of a potential Scarf HP Ice and swaps into his Heatran, which ends up being the correct play as the Rotom goes for a Will-O-Wisp. The Rotom then reveals that it has the Hidden Power Ground, as it does hit a pretty good amount of Gator's team with the Heatran, Klefki, and Drapion. But the Heatran is able to take the Hidden Power Ground relatively well and set up the Stealth Rocks. Stealth Rocks are going to be very important because the Rotom, Araquanid, and Togekiss do not want to be switching into those rocks. Then Gator is going to bring in his Altaria as Rotom goes for another Hidden Power, which will fail as Altaria has not Mega Evolved yet. And then as the Altaria does Mega Evolve, the Rotom is going to Volt Switch into the Togekiss, taking a very big frustration from the Altaria, and also that Rocks damage will not allow it to survive the next frustration, and Togekiss will go down. The Rotom Heat is going to come back, and Gator is going to make some pretty good plays around this Rotom, as we'll see in the next couple of turns, as he's going to first bring out his Heatran on the Will-O-Wisp. Then he's going to stay in to Toxic the Rotom, as he recognizes he doesn't really have a reliable way of killing it without either a potential revenge kill or something getting burned, and since most of his team is physically offensive, he doesn't want to risk anything getting burned. So here he's going to Toxic the Rotom. Then he's going to swap into the Altaria as the Hidden Power Ground comes out, which doesn't do any damage to that Altaria. And then the Rotom is going to Will-O-Wisp, but this doesn't matter because the Altaria is carrying the Heal Bell. So as the Rotom Will-O-Wisp, the Altaria resets up the HP. We see the Metagross come out, and then the Altaria Heal Bell's getting rid of that burn right away. With the Metagross out, the Altaria is going to swap into the Buzzwole, and the Metagross is going to Meteor Mash, doing basically no damage. I believe that this Buzzwole was relatively physically defensive to take on the Diggersby. We didn't see the Diggersby though, but the Buzzwole did end up being a pretty good switch in to the Metagross instead. Now we're going to see the Araquanid come out, and Buzzwole is going to get a Crit Drain Punch. Now the Crit Drain Punch, in combination with the Rocks damage, will put it in range of a Thunder Punch. I believe Gator mentioned that the Thunder Punch would have been a roll without the Crit Drain Punch, but either way it would have been a 2-hit KO with the Thunder Punch. I don't know what move the Araquanid would have gone for here, as Necro has not uploaded his commentary, but the Thunder Punch is going to come out and knock out the Araquanid. This, however, does give the Shadows a chance to send in their Mega Alakazam. The Buzzwole is going to swap for the Drapion. The Drapion is pretty well equipped to take on the Alakazam. The only thing that it can't really deal with is a Focus Blast, but it can at least take one as the Drapion is being switched in. However, the Alakazam is going to get up a substitute, then go for a Focus Blast, and unfortunately miss, which will allow the Drapion to break its sub. The Alakazam will attempt the sub again, but the Drapion is going to break that as well. Then we will see the Focus Blast come out. It will connect this time, nearly knocking out the Drapion. So had it connected originally, basically what would have happened is the Drapion would have gone down, the Alakazam would have just not had a substitute, would have been the only thing. So something could have potentially revenge killed the Alakazam or scared it out. Either way, I think this Focus Blast miss doesn't matter a whole lot. It's obviously impossible to say without going into ridiculous amounts of theory modding, but the Alakazam is going to go down, and then the Drapion is going to go down on the following turn as the Hawlucha comes out to High Jump Kick. Then we see the Altaria, and the Hawlucha is going to swap out for the Rotom, not wanting to take a Fairy type attack. The Rotom is going to die with a combination of the Stealth Rocks and the Frustration. Then we see the Metagross come back out as the Altaria is going to Cotton Guard. Now, the Metagross revealed kind of early on that it wasn't super attack invested, so with the Cotton Guards, the Altaria is going to be able to take Meteor Mashes very well. The Metagross on the first turn, instead of going for the Meteor Mash, does go for the Stealth Rocks, probably assuming the Altaria was going to swap out, as we did see the Altaria swap out on that Metagross earlier. This Metagross is carrying an Air Balloon, so it does not have to worry about an Earthquake coming off from the Altaria, but with the Cotton Guards, the Altaria is going to be able to take on the Metagross very well, and then eventually we will see the Altaria break the Air Balloon, but as the Altaria goes for a Roost on the next turn, the Metagross will Meteor Mash, getting a critical hit and just one-shotting that Altaria. This will bring out the Klefki to set up the Reflect as Metagross tries to Earthquake. This won't really matter though, because with the Reflect, the Klefki will take it very well. And then we will see the Flygon come out in place of the Klefki on the Earthquake, which obviously will not do anything, which will allow that Flygon to get a Dragon Dance and then knock out both the Metagross and then use a Z Continental Crush to finish off the Hawlucha. So yeah, I mean, there was quite a bit of luck here between the Crit Drain Punch, the Focus Blast miss, and then obviously the crit on the Altaria. I think overall the hacks didn't matter too much to affect the end outcome of the battle, because if Flygon did ever get to +1 at that stage, it would have won. So let's say hypothetically something knocks out the Alakazam, and then we see or even if the Alakazam is still up, and then like we see potentially the Klefki get up a Reflect, then the Flygon get a +1, it still could have won the game. So yeah, there's that. I think Gator played very well early on around that Rotom, which did allow him to not have any of his physical offense burned. For example, that had that Flygon been burned turn 1, then he would have missed out on the chance to potentially sweep later on. But yeah, that is going to be it for this match, and we'll move on to the next one. So moving in to our next matchup, we have the Borussia Donphan versus the very unfortunate Columbus Chew, getting another loss this week. The Donphan have the lineup of the Kyurem Black, Tabu Fini, Crocodile, Lurantis, Mega Manectric, and Delphox, while Coach Z and the Chew have Mega Gardevoir, Excadrill, Hippowdon, Sneasel, Celebi, and Mienshao. Starting the battle, we see the Mienshao against the Tapu Fini, U-turning right away into the Celebi, which is going to lose its Choice Scarf. Not an amazing start for the Chew, but they are able to U-turn on the incoming Delphox to their Hippowdon. This will start a chain of the Tapu Fini coming in on the Hippowdon, which will bring the Celebi back in, which will bring the Delphox back in, and eventually the Columbus Chew will set up their Stealth Rocks to hinder the Delphox from switching in so freely. So now, instead of bringing in the Delphox, the Borussia Donphan are going to be bringing in their Kyurem, which is actually going to be able to take hits from the Celebi while also gaining HP with the Roost. Eventually, the Chew will U-turn to the Mienshao, then U-turning again on the incoming Tapu Fini to the Sneasel, which will miss out on the KO with a Poison Jab, getting picked off by the Tapu Fini. Lars then chooses to preserve his Fini, as it is going to be his Kyurem, which is going to come back out on the field in front of the Celebi, risking a crit because the Celebi is hitting it quite a few times, but we do not see the crit happen. And once that Kyurem is healthy enough from roosting, Lars is going to go for a Shadow Claw, but instead of hitting the Celebi, it happened to be the turn where the Chew decided to bring in their Gardevoir, which is really going to do a lot of damage to that Gardevoir, having that really low defense. Lars will then sack off his Tapu Fini, which will allow the Delphox to come in and revenge kill the Mega Gardevoir. Coach Z will be able to knock out that Delphox, but the game is going to be sealed up once this Lurantis comes in and sets up a superpower. With the Gardevoir gone, the Sneasel out of the way, and soon to be the Celebi, the Chew will have nothing to kill this Lurantis without a crit. They aren't able to get the crit, and Lars will decide to use the Synthesis on the correct turns to keep the Lurantis healthy enough to be able to kill the Celebi, the Excadrill, Hippowdon, and Mienshao, giving Lars and the Borussia Donphan the 4-0 victory over the Chew.
Yeah, first of all, huge shoutouts to Lars for sweeping with Lurantis. Definitely an improved Pokemon, I guess you could say, from the move tutors it got in Ultra Sun and Moon. Because to my knowledge, it didn't get superpower before that, right?
You might be correct. I don't know about that though.
Yeah, I think that's the case here, and that's definitely very solid, a solid way for Lars to play it. I don't necessarily have much to comment on regarding how Coach Z plays, to be honest, because I think it's pretty obvious now that his performance hasn't been the best, I guess you could say. Which is kind of unfortunate because he seems to always come out every week, have a cause in what he says, and then just loses every week. But despite that, I think it should be worth mentioning that Lars definitely did stick to his game plan very well, just to be able to set himself up for a Lurantis sweep in the end was very well done on his behalf. So yeah, like, I don't think there is much to say about this match at all, to be honest. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all there really is to say. So that's going to wrap up the matches for this week. Do you want to move into the conference breakdown and talk a little bit about that?
Alright, so as for the conference breakdown, the main takeaway from the conference breakdown which you see before you would mainly be the fact that despite the loss which Chimpact ended up taking this week, it really did not affect him much in the grand scheme of things, which is pretty good for him. But But yeah, Jolt is now officially the only undefeated coach in this season of the GBA, so that's pretty nice to see, not gonna lie. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, making it to the halfway mark undefeated is definitely quite the feat, because we don't see too many coaches do that. I'm not sure if any have in the past. I'm sure there have been some, but there's obviously definitely been some pretty long winning sprees, although I'm not sure if anyone's ever made it to playoffs undefeated. So if he was able to do it this season, that would be very impressive. As far as the rest of the conference breakdown goes, not much has changed in any of the divisions, except for, of course, the ever-changing Akala division. We now see Tom in third instead of first, and Mono in first instead of third. Talking about playoffs, I believe the big change is currently the Giantes have knocked the Bronx Bearticks out of the wildcard spot, taking it for themselves, and I believe the Gators have knocked the Sharpedos out of the wildcard spot down there, taking that for themselves. Other than that, though, playoffs is still really anyone's game, talking about the teams that we have been talking about, and we will continue to see this change as the season progresses. Moving on to most of the people's watching favorite part of the show, we have the league leaders. Leading the league leaders will be the Thunderous Incarnate, 12-5 from the not very good win-loss team being the Detroit Steel Wings, but they are doing very well with this Thunderous Incarnate, currently leading the league. Next up, we have the Breloom, who's finally climbed into the top 3, getting 11 kills and only 1 death from the Kansas City Draw Chiefs. Jolt just proving time and time again that this Mon is an absolute monster in the right hands. Next up, we have the Nihilgo, knocked down from Grace a little bit, but still holding on in the top 3 with the 11-3 KD. Moving on to our 4 through 10, we're actually going to see some more Megas this week. Previously, it was only the Pinsler up at the top, but now Pinsler is going to be joined by the Megalopony, getting quite a lot of kills this week, now being at 10-5. The Pinsler being knocked down to number 5 with 9-1. The Zygarde getting knocked down a little bit as it wasn't brought this week into the number 6 spot, 8-0. Still no deaths on that Zygarde. Next up, we have the Weavile being 8-4 from the Tampa Bay Luxrays, kind of solidifying its position even though it was not able to pick up any kills this week. Then we have the Haxorus from San Francisco Giantes at 8-5, followed by the Komodo from the San Jose Sharpedos, coming off that sweep from last week at 7-1, and then the Megas are now also joined by that Mega Altaria from the Florida Gators at 7-3.
So the main takeaway from the entire standings you see before you would have to be the fact that, again, Breloom is an absolute monster. Like, it's been so criminally underrated for so long that many don't end up realizing exactly what its full potential is. And to be honest, I'm very glad to see Jolt finally give it the spotlight it deserves, unless it hits 2 bullet seeds, of course. But I'm sorry, this will never get old. I'm sorry, Jolt, I love you. But yeah, as far as the other Pokemon go, I think it's pretty self-explanatory with Mega Altaria finally making the list, because, you know, we all know how nasty the Cotton Guard set can really be if used right. And what really surprised me the most about this week would have to be Thundurus being the leader amongst all these Pokemon. But I guess it just goes to show exactly how great its ability is at what it does. And yes, while you could definitely make the argument that people would rather prefer Thunderous Terrain over Thunderous Incarnate on many occasions due to Volt Absorb alone, that still does not change the fact that Thunderous Incarnate is a top tier Draftmon, and this just pretty much shows exactly just that.
And one thing to add to that is, in the previous season, Chase was able to have one of the top mons being Cobalion. So Crimson Seabat is really able to just show that it doesn't really matter what mons are in his hands. He can get a lot of kills with it. And, you know, he isn't doing very well this season, as I mentioned, with his win-loss ratio. But he does still have a mon repping the Crimson City at the top of that list. So that's going to wrap things up for this week of the weekly recap. Thanks again to you for filling in for the confusion, as obviously he wasn't able to make it this week. You were a big help, so thanks for coming on again.
It's no problem. I hope that I was entertaining enough, and like if my narration was a bit off, I'm sorry guys. I'm still a bit groggy, but yeah. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, feel free to drop a like on this video. Let me know in the comment section down below what are your thoughts on exactly how this week has gone. And with that, we'll see you all next week.